Ron, as you and I know, there's no ignoring the fact that high-stakes accountability testing is very present on the educational landscape. Teachers, principals, everybody else feel really pressured by that. They feel like they have to teach to the test. They can't do the kinds of things that you've been doing so well and other schools have been doing so well because it doesn't align precisely with teaching the stuff that's going to be tested on the state standardized tests. What advice would you give to teachers about that?
Well, there's no denying that that's the currency by which schools and teachers and principals are going to be measured. But it's also clear that the schools that tend to do really well in those are ones that don't focus heavily on just test preparation. Because I think the biggest constraint on doing well in tests is the extent to which kids really care about school, the extent to which their heart is in their learning and their spirit is there. And if it's a school with a tremendous sense of mission and community, then the kids work hard at everything. They work hard in their projects, their character. They also work hard in getting ready for tests, and they give their best on tests. And if it's a school where kids are drilled constantly and they don't have that spirit and heart, they're going to do poorly. So I think if I were right now a principal of a school under great pressure to raise test scores, character would be at the core of what I was doing and building community. To get kids with a real sense of mission, that this is a school they believe in, that they want to do well in, and they want to be part of a team that does well in. So I think a lot of it is just that kind of intensity.
And what about the pedagogy? I mean, the pedagogy of drill and grill and so on is, I know, one you don't affirm. So how would you respond to people who say that's the pedagogy I need to get kids to learn? What would you suggest as an alternative?
Well, let me use a metaphor, which is if I were coaching basketball here, there'd be a lot of time where you're doing layup drills in practice. Because there's a lot of practice and drill that you got to do to be good at anything. You can't be good at an instrument, you can't be good at basketball unless you're practicing a lot. On the other hand, if you always practiced drills and you never got to play a game, you never got to walk through things and have something to be proud of, if you never played for an audience or performed your instrument in front of other people, you'd pretty quickly get tired of even trying. And so the reason kids practice hard at shooting layups or doing dribbling drills is because they know they're going to be out on a court and hopefully in front of other people, and hopefully in a game where they feel some real reason to have to be proud of what they did. Or if they're practicing their instrument, eventually they're going to be playing in front of an audience. If we only drill kids and we only do practice, they're going to lose their heart over time.
I'll play devil's advocate
Sure.
with you for a moment. What if somebody says to you, yeah, but taking the test is the performance, that's the game.
Yeah.
They've been practicing, and the game is taking that test and getting the score on the test.
Yeah. Well, that might be true if they were taking the test in front of an audience of people they cared about and the results were instant. Since they have no idea why the test is being given, they don't get results until a year later often, or 6 months later. It really is a test of the school rather than a test of them in a way, whether they've been taught. The kids don't see that connection, and it's not something that they ever tend to be particularly proud of. So it's, they don't get that pride of having done something well crafted.
We have lots of data now, particularly at the secondary level, but other places as well, of how alienated kids are from school. They just don't find school relevant. They don't find it engaging. They don't see the rationale or justification for why they have to spend so many hours of their youth sitting in classrooms doing what we typically do in education these days. What advice do you have for the field of education, teachers, principals, whomever you want to target about this malaise?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, the first thing about alienation is that kids shouldn't be anonymous in the building. So the first thing I would say is that every school, whether it's a little elementary or even a big high school, has to figure out systems to build community. So there have to be structures where kids are doing class meetings, community meetings, whole school meetings. So people know them, kids know them, they feel like they're part of a team and a relationship. Even in a big high school, it's got to have sub-communities in that school where kids feel like I'm a part of something. Mm-hmm. That's the first step, I think, against alienation, is not to be anonymous, is to be really a part of something big. Another thing is to have an authentic reason for why you're there and doing something. So giving kids a voice and directing some of that, respecting them with understanding what are our targets for learning and why we're doing this work and where we're trying to get to. And then hopefully having some audience outside the building for some of the work they do, so they feel like they want to show their work, build a portfolio that they get to show to their family, to the community, or doing projects that have some real effect for good in the community. so that they think, there's a reason for why we're doing this stuff.
I mean, you've seen kids transform because they get involved in projects that do have meaning, that do have import in the world, for which they can see the impact of their work and so on. What happens to kids when they engage in something like that?
Yeah, I think when kids are a part of something where they feel like they've done something important and powerful that's helped other people, it transforms them to the other person. I mean, I think those kids become different people. And I think there's no way that you can change a kid's self-image by continually telling them they're better than they think they are. You can tell them that all year, and you can tell them that for 5 years in a row, and they don't believe it. It's not until they've done something better than they thought they could do, whether that's a performance or whether it's a piece of work or whether it's even a test performance, but it's something that they've done where they think, man, I didn't think I could do that, and I did. That's what transforms them. It's not the words. It's the deeds. It's the accomplishments, I think, that change them.
There's a really powerful quote near the end of your book, I forget exactly where, from the mother who was at the cashier in the supermarket talking to you about her son who had gone through your class earlier and said you changed his life, you transformed him. And her answer when you asked her, why or what do you mean, was, I thought, really indicative of that. And she said something like, do you want to say what she said? Why don't you tell
Please
us?
do. Go ahead.
No? It was something like, now, no matter how many people tell him he's stupid, he knows he's not, because he did excellent work in your class. He knows he can do it.
Right. And he's a grown-up now, and I know him. And he's got the same learning disabilities as he had then. He's a carpenter now, actually.
Oh, really?
But he was a kid who struggled with academic work, even though he had a lot of intelligences, and he's a good carpenter. The school intelligences in literacy and math were not easy for him. And yet he did great work on that well study project where we tested the wells in town and made sure that people's well water was safe to drink. And he was so organized and so together. And he knew he was capable of really strong academic work in the right setting. And once you know that, you think, nobody can take that away from you.
In your presentation, much of the work that you do, the project-based work and so on, is the kind of work that often is enrichment education, gifted education, where people think only those really gifted kids can go beyond the traditional curriculum and produce these remarkable products and this work of excellence. But I notice you very often highlight kids like this particular kid who had a variety of challenges that put them in the group that most people would say are below average in academic aptitude and so on. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I in that particular class where we did that well study, which was so powerful, had the largest percentage of special ed children I've had in 28 years of teaching. It was the class where some people would think, let's not try anything hard this year because this is a really struggling group. And I think that the potential of kids is so vastly untapped. I think kids have the ability to rise to such levels of maturity and sophistication if they're asked to. And we just don't think to ask them. We don't trust kids with that level of importance. And some of the kids who have some learning challenges are the kids who are most capable of taking on real-life responsibilities in a real project. So, yeah, I'd never hesitate to dive into really sophisticated work.
One of the places you see that distinction made, again, is underprivileged kids. They may not be kids with learning disabilities, but people often assume that when a kid gets into the schools, particularly in secondary school, that if they've come from a really disadvantaged background, impoverished background, a high-risk background, that they're damaged goods and they no longer can achieve. Maybe they were born, the tabula rasa and could have been or had the potential, but they no longer can. You've been doing a lot of work now with Outward Bound and the Expeditionary Learning Program with inner city youth who come from those backgrounds. What would you say to those folks?
That once again, it's a tremendous underestimation of what those kids can achieve. So that most of the kids in schools that I work with now in expeditionary learning are low-income kids in urban settings, mostly kids that are non-white and that come from challenged backgrounds, kids for whom the prejudice is always that they won't succeed. In those cities, the graduation rate is often less than 50%, and the expectation we have is that they're all going to college. And in the few schools where we've gotten graduates, they've all gone to college. And I think a lot of it is the expectation sort of constrains where you're going to go. If you think they're not going to make it, they may not make it. If the kids come into the school and they think, in this school you have no choice but to go to college, you're going to go to college. I mean, it's just a different expectation.
So kids are a lot more malleable and flexible, and the potential's there.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a silly metaphor, and it only relates to people who are into football. But as a Massachusetts person and a pro football fan, the Patriots, which is my team this year, undefeated season, and they picked up Randy Moss as a receiver. And the take on Randy Moss is, this guy has an attitude problem, and nobody should ever take him.
It's a bad apple.
Exactly right. And he's not even a kid. He's an adult. He has not only had no attitude problem in the Patriots, he's a team leader in blocking and just sort of being a team member and not being a self-aggrandizing guy. He's like an entirely different person than all the NFL analysts said he was. And you think, if an adult can be like that, it's not just the person, it's the environment that you put them in. So, I mean, he's a perfect example of somebody who's now breaking records because he's a team player. And the thought that, this kid's now 15, he's too old to change. I mean, that's ridiculous. They're just not in the right environment, is what it is,
Probably up till about 50 years ago in the U.S., always been part of preparation for life in a democracy. The core of education has always been producing the virtuous citizens that our founding fathers said we needed for this democracy to survive. About 50 years ago, American education lost that as a primary vision for what we were trying to do. On one hand, we could look at the work you do and say, you actually fit in with the last 50 years. You're trying to turn kids into scientists. That's what they wanted since Sputnik and so on.
Sure.
But there's much more to what you're doing than just turning kids into scientists. And I wonder if you'd comment on the degree to which you see your work as preparation of the whole child for contributing to society.
Now, I think that's really well said. And one of my mentors has been Debbie Meyer, whose whole mission in life is around schools and democracy. And to me, this work is building citizens. And somehow we got off task as a nation and forgot that the whole point of schools is to build citizens. And that to work on academic skills in a vacuum, to not think about who are the citizens we're creating. Are we creating the kind of people we want to live with? Are we creating the kind of people we want to work for and work under? Are we creating the kind of people we want to have lead our nation? Somehow, it's insane to me that we've sort of taken that whole part of the mission of education and thought, well, yeah, this is just to get kids ready for tests. And then they go out in the real world, and for the rest of their life, they're measured not by test-taking ability, but by the kind of work they do and the kind of people that they are. And, why are we not measuring them in schools by the kind of work they do and the kind of people that they are? It's like, in real life, it's not tests that tell who you are, it's who you are and what you do. And it's amazing to me that the path of education has become so narrow, and the way we measure kids' achievement is so narrow, that the whole idea of building citizens seems to be not part of the national discourse at the moment. I know we're going to have to return to it.
Yeah, and you have a particular insight in that because you're in this small town for decades, and as you said, almost everybody in this town under the age of 40-something has been a student of yours and gone through your classes. Now when I refer to kids who were in the book written a while back or other anecdotes you tell, you can report back, I know what they're doing now, they're adults. So you see the contribution they're making to your little local town and how they are the future of the town. And how does that inform your work?
Well, it's certainly clear that, in my town, pretty much everyone under the age of 43 was a student of mine, and they're the people that plow the roads, they're the people that build the houses, they're the people that are the nurses, and and if I didn't do a good job, and if my school didn't do a good job preparing them, then when I go to the hospital, it's like they're the people I'm depending on.
Sure.
When I had my driveway built, it was one of my students that did it. When I had the plumbing done, it's one of my students that did it. I hope that they had an ethic of, I'm going to do high-quality work. I'm going to be a great citizen and a really great worker, because I'm depending on them now. So it would have been really short-sighted of us to think all I cared about was their test-taking ability, rather than sort of their ethic in life of high-quality work.
And one of the things we don't do in this society is think long-term.
Exactly.
But you're given the opportunity to see the long-term effects, and apparently you did think long-term. I want to switch a little bit and talk about the popular media. When you and I were kids, the popular media had some violence in it. It was pretty sanitized violence. They certainly had bad people, but they were stereotyped bad people. There was not a high dosage because there weren't that many media out there for us to get the stuff. I didn't worry too much about the impact of media on kids 2-3 decades ago. I do worry about it now. And I don't know how much you've thought about it, but I'm curious if you would comment on the impact of popular media on the development of kids and how that helps or hinders what you're trying to do with your career.
Yeah, I have, and this is an area which I tend to be fairly conservative in the sense that there are certain things that really worry me about the changes. The first worry I have is not the content of media, but the amount of time kids are spending with electronic media versus spending time in creative pursuits in the outdoors or with hands-on stuff. And I read Richard Louve's book about nature deficit disorder, The Last Child Outside. And it's not a perfect book, and there's a lot in there that from a data standpoint and from a research standpoint, I think the research wasn't all that carefully done. And yet I entirely agree with his premise, which is that there's something healing to us as people about being in nature, that when we were kids, and when you and I were kids, we spent most of our time outside of school playing outdoors and being in nature, whether the nature was just on the block or whether it was out in the woods. And that today, my grandsons would much rather be playing video games, that when they visit me, we make them put away their video games and take them hiking. And at first, they would rather be playing their video games. And then they get out in the world, and you see it kind of healing them. So my first concern is the extent to which kids are in front of electronic media versus being out in the world. My grandsons play electronic games to mine for crystals in a fantasy world. And I'm trying to get them out to actually mine for crystals in the real world, to actually dig stuff up underground, which is so much more exciting than doing it on a handheld video game. It's remarkable to me that we have very high standards, apparently, for kids seeing naked bodies or sexuality, and almost no standards for them seeing killing and death and torture and all kinds of violence, which doesn't seem to affect the ratings of games and music and media a lot. And it's when I hosted from some folks from Sweden, they were so shocked that it was not okay to be naked around people or show naked bodies, but it was fine to show people with machine guns to little kids. They said, how did this come to be? And I said, well, if you don't live in this country, you don't realize sort of how desensitized we got to that. So I do actually sound like an old guy because I have a lot of concerns about both of those things.
Yeah, and I think, it's a few things. It's as you say, it's the dosage has changed a lot. The graphic nature has changed a lot too. But I think another interesting piece that's happened with the media is the ambiguity factor has increased. It's no longer clear who's good and who's bad and where that line is drawn. And I think that's a piece people aren't talking about. We're trying to help young kids develop the clarity of right and wrong, and the media are muddying it. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think that's why there's this enduring popularity for the Star Wars series or the Lord of the Rings or those mythic legends where it's so clear, good and evil. I mean, in Star Wars, those issues are really clear, and morality and ethics are so clear. And in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's so clear. And the fact that those kind of books don't go out of style and out of taste, the fact that my grandsons are reading Lord of the Rings, I've read it 5 times, part of the appeal to that is this notion that there is good and right in the world. And it's really clear when something is good and right. And that when you do good deeds, it kind of accrues, in those books, power, but in your own life, just sort of personal grace that you carry with you by doing good. And that there really is a payback from doing good, not in money, but in your own equanimity in life. And I think that's where I really bond, for example, with my grandsons, because they come over and they want to watch the Lord of the Rings movies again and again, even though they've read the books now, because there's something about good triumphing that really matters to them.
It's interesting. The old battle between good and evil is now, there's been a sort of a derivative battle now, which is between differentiating and conflating good and evil. And you've got both this move towards Lord of the Rings, the Narnia series, and other things coming back that make that really clear. And then you've got, The Sopranos and Dexter and these other things that are conflating them.
That's
and
true,
trying to make them. So I think we have a new battle on our hands between those who want to differentiate and those who want to conflate. In some senses, you have a wonderful job now in that you're helping to create schools in the image that you think a school ought to be.
Right.
And we've talked about some of the countervailing forces. We talked about No Child Left Behind and high-stakes testing. We talked about the media. We've talked about the irrelevance of schools and so on. Another one is commercialization. One way of talking about that is the degree to which schools are taking money from corporations to sell their products, to advertise their products, allowing video shows to be shown on closed-circuit TV that have advertising on them. Another one is for-profit organizations owning schools, setting up schools. And so our capitalist society is having an impact in a variety of ways on the nature of schools. So as you're building schools in the image that you think is worthwhile and meaningful, what are your thoughts on these other moves to make schools and other images driven by commercialization?
Well, I have only disdain for all the movements of profit-based education, which I am entirely against. And I think if your charter is owned by a for-profit organization, there will be countless times when decisions get made with profit underneath rather than the best needs of kids. No matter what you say, your motives are, if profit's underlying it, if you have investors in your corporation that's running a school. I hate the idea of it. I can't believe we've allowed it to be. I also don't want kids watching commercials when they're being kept by force by us in public schools to watch commercials on the television set that was provided for the corner of the room. But I think the biggest impact of capitalism on education is textbook companies, because textbook companies end up defining the curriculum of most American schools. Schools don't have a choice but to purchase textbooks that their districts have decided they're going to choose. Those companies are into it for profit, and the whole No Child Left Behind and Reading First movement is heavily influenced by big money and textbook publishers. So when the Reading First program comes in and it gets approved as the federal mandate that gets put into schools, that's because the textbook companies sponsored tests that showed that their textbooks need to be worked. This program works with that. And you end up getting top-down mandates dictated not by educators, but by for-profit publishers. And it's across the entire nation.
If you could give one message to educators based on what you've learned all these years about what needs to change in education, what do educators, schools, principals, superintendents need to understand to change, to make schools a better place for everybody? What would be the parting message you'd give them?
Well, two different ones.
Okay.
One would be for schools of education, that I think my model for how teachers should get ready to be teachers is how carpenters should get ready to be carpenters, which is you don't go from being a student to jumping into a role where you have the most experience you'll ever have for the rest of your life. You would never take somebody directly out of tech school in carpentry and say, now you're a master carpenter and we'll never give you advice for the rest of your life. Just go ahead and build a house. You put that carpenter as an apprentice and then a journeyman, and after about 6 or 7 years, you think they know what they're doing. In teaching, they take people directly out of the School of Ed where they've done a little bit of student teaching and then say, here's your classroom, good luck for the next 35 years. So this idea that teachers can immediately jump into a situation where they know what they're doing and that they'll, for then on, know what they're doing is nuts. And in other countries, certainly, there's a whole lot more of support and mentoring. We say we have mentoring, but that means across the building there's a teacher who has a full-time teaching load, but when they have an extra moment, they come and try to tell you how they can help you. It's not at all like an apprenticeship program when you're on a carpentry crew and you're working under a master carpenter for a couple of years until you really know what you're doing. That's a financial commitment that we haven't been willing to make as a country. But another thing I would say is if there's a mistake we make as a nation, it's not trusting teachers and not trusting students. So this whole teacher-proof curriculum movement, that we just want to design curriculum that's so foolproof that teachers will deliver it like they're guys at a gas station delivering gasoline. I mean, why not have robots if you have the whole thing teacher-proof? Why not just do it on the computer? Teaching is an art, and it's built on relationship. It's built on relationship with kids. It can't be teacher-proof, can't be just delivered. And teachers need to understand that kids are underestimated all the time. That any group of kids that is assumed to be not very good at stuff probably hasn't had the opportunity or the expectation to be good at things. And so we are incredibly underestimating teachers and kids by thinking we have to tell them what to do every minute.